Blended finance is bringing people with different interests together to solve a common problem. And while there is alignment on the common agenda, there are also diverse interests and incentives for these stakeholders.
The biggest benefit of blended finance is that it naturally draws in capital, larger pools of capital. What has always been the core of the investment philosophy of the Dell Foundation has been who do we serve and how do we serve them such that this transformation happens.
I can also say that the work you've done in making impact measurable and tangible is very, very real. In the current conversations that Satwa is having in the ecosystem, especially with the domestic philanthropists, there is this genuine interest to say, hey, can I keep my dollar or my rupee and make it work much more?
This is where there is a lot of power in blended finance to be able to solve the problem.
Ideas have to get to a certain level of maturity before they are ready for blending.
I'm also very positive on so many of these ecosystem shifts which are happening in development, which will solve for those problems.
Welcome to Decoding Impact from Satwa Knowledge Institute, a podcast hosted by me, Rathish Balakrishnan, where we talk to experts to go beyond simplistic solutions to complex problems and understand what does it take to systemically solve them at scale. We often wonder why solutions in the impact space don't scale, and we make it a function of the actual solution itself. The question to ask ourselves is, have we built the right infrastructure or the right scaffolding for social impact solutions to scale? Think about the mainstream market. You have angel investing, seed capital, Series A, Series B, and then subsequently public markets. And in each of these stages, the capital is designed to take a certain level of risk for a certain level of reward. Today, in the social impact space, almost all of the capital at all times is essentially only philanthropic money. And when you look at the amount of money that we need to solve social problems, all of what we call philanthropic capital accounts for only 5% of the total funding, with 95% coming from public funding from the governments. The question that we ask ourselves is, if we were to define and design a scaffolding that provides the right money at the right time to the right solution, what would that look like? And how can blended finance play a role in making that happen? To answer this question and to discuss blended finance in general with us, we have with us Prachi Windlass. Prachi is a senior director at Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. She has been part of the conceptualization and the execution of some of the most flagship initiatives in blended finance in India today, including the Skill India Impact Bond, the Quality Education Impact Bond, and many others. Prachi is also somebody who spent a lot of time thinking about what does it take to solve for problems at scale. I could not think of a better person than her to join us for this conversation today. Prachi, thank you so much for joining us. Over the years, we've had a lot of great conversations, so it's actually good to have you as a guest on the Decoding Impact podcast. Before we begin, Prachi, I would love to hear your journey as to what has been your path so far and how did blended finance become a part of it?
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Rathish. It is a fascinating topic, one that's very close to my heart. So I'm so happy that you've made it a topic on your podcast and also invited us to be a part of this today. Let me start with my personal journey first and then come to how this journey intertwined with the journey at the Foundation for Blended Finance to become a large part of our investing in India. I've been at the Foundation almost 14 years now. I've worked across all the areas which the Foundation invests in, which is education, livelihoods, and financial inclusion, and have interacted with this from very different perspectives. As a grant-making organization, we've made direct grants in this space. We've also participated equally actively in the equity space in social enterprises in the form of program-related investments. And everything that is in between kind of naturally merged to blended finance. Prior to the Foundation, I have spent a few years at the Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant. I'm an engineer by training and have spent several years in technology roles in the US in companies like Qualcomm and Motorola. So coming to now the objective, and there is a big harmony with what I personally want to achieve and what the Foundation's aspiration is to transform the lives of children and youth living in urban poverty, and do that through education, livelihoods, and financial inclusion. What has always been the core of the investment philosophy of the Dell Foundation has been that who do we serve and how do we serve them such that this transformation happens. We take this word transformation very seriously in our mission statement. So impact was always very core to the way we were investing. Measurement of defining impact as well as measurement of that impact was core to how we were investing in India. And this led to two separate portfolios almost growing within the foundation simultaneously. So we are a grant maker. We give grants to organizations which are working in these areas that I mentioned. And because we were working with our partners on measuring impact and improving impact. So for example, in education, the focus was always, is the learning outcome of children improving? In jobs and livelihoods, the focus was, are we not only about certifications and completing skilling courses, but are the youth getting into jobs? Are they staying in these jobs? Is their income increasing over a period of time? Are they getting into progressive career pathways? In financial inclusion, the metric was that is credit becoming available to businesses who've not had access to credit in the past? Are their businesses growing as a result of access to this credit? So in all of our grant making, these impact matrix were core to that mission alignment between us and our partners on achievement of that, right? And as we worked with more and more partners, we've been in India now for 18 years, what was coming out of that work was a very clear definition of this is the metric which transformed lives for each individual portfolio that we were working. What was also coming out was this pool of high quality organizations which could achieve it with a certain level of prediction or certainty. And finally, it would also giving us what is at the base or the core of blended finance. It was almost giving us a rate card. At this cost per child or at this cost per youth, this is the outcome which can be achieved. So all of this was great, but this was all within the Dell Foundation ecosystem. It was data that existed between us and our partners. We could make more grants to them, and we could scale them. But really, I would say this was remaining within us and our partners. On the other side of it, we are a very active impact investor. We were investing in several social enterprises through equity, or sometimes through debt, and growing market-based solutions. Earlier in urban microfinance, now in MSME financing, a lot of job tech, skill tech, ed tech. So this is where we were getting to see a lot of innovation coming to the fore of these problems being applied to the communities that we serve. We were also seeing a lot of inflow of commercial capital as these business models were getting proven and were proving that they could actually scale and serve a certain target segment that they were going after, and therefore inherently more sustainability in these models. So there were these two simultaneous kind of benefits that we were seeing, right? A deep impact model, core focus on the communities, the innovation on the other hand, a lot of high speed growth, commercial capital coming in. And that's where naturally a lot of blended finance started emerging in our work, where we wanted to bring impact front and center, but at the same time do it with growing leverage in terms of all forms of capital, not just commercial capital, all forms of capital coming into solving those problems, and also to see higher sustainability in that work as it scales.
Wow. You've covered a lot of ground, Prachi. As someone who's worked with MSDF over the years, I can also say that the work you've done in making impact measurable and tangible is very, very real. In some sense, you set up an entire industry that then invested in building better tools for measuring impacts. There are organizations that are able to do it for the entire ecosystem. So I can personally relate to a lot of what you're saying as well. But taking this word blended finance, Prachi, if I were a 5-year-old, maybe 10, maybe, and you had to explain it to me, saying what is blended finance? What would that be?
Sure. So, like the common industry definition, I would say, of blended finance is blending of commercial capital and developmental capital, that could be either coming from government or from philanthropic sources, towards the achievement of a well-defined social goal.
Right.
So it is in the context of jobs and livelihoods, the common social goal is that we want youth to get placed in jobs which are progressive career pathways at a certain income level, at a certain salary level. And we want to ensure that not just the philanthropic capital is coming and promoting that cause, but we also foresee this problem getting solved when large pools of commercial capital, large pools of government capital starts coming into this. But at the same time, all of this blending is being done fundamentally to improve that outcome for youths coming from communities where they are not getting these opportunities today.
Right. And I want to break down why this blending is important, Prachi. One is just the quantum of capital problem. Like philanthropy capital is limited, commercial capital is a lot more. And so just bringing in commercial capital just increases the size of capital we can apply to solving a particular problem, which just gives us a lot more agency to solve this at a much larger scale than what we can, number one. But there is also this view that I've had that sometimes philanthropic capital is a wrong capital to solve a problem. Philanthropic capital, when spent on problems that market should solve, solves it wrongly and creates perverse incentives. Sometimes keeps the market away from solving that problem as well. And that is another thing to sort of keep in mind. Would you agree on both of these? Are there other reasons why blending as a principle is very, very important?
Yeah. I'll add a third to it. In addition to saying we need larger pools of capital to solve the problem, number one, definitely true. I wouldn't say that, in some cases, philanthropic capital is the wrong capital, but I think there is a certain limited role that philanthropic capital can play. So to make sure that the philanthropic capital plays the role that it plays best, which is being a catalytic type of funding, is the second big reason for blended finance. The third, I would say, Rathish, is the blending is very important to bring in the best of both of these types of capital, truly blending the benefits of two sources of capital also. Let me start with elaborating on the last one first. What is the benefit of having philanthropic capital? It is, at the end of the day, the highest risk-taking capital. It is the most impact-focused capital because this pool of capital has been put aside by whatever the source of that capital is for the purpose of achieving impact. So impact is front and center for it. That's the reason why we have philanthropy. So it has a deep focus on impact. It has almost no other agenda than impact. That's one. So there are definite benefits which come with that deep focus. The commercial capital, on the other hand, has a certain financial discipline. It has a way of looking at cost benefit analysis. It has a way of even interacting with the social enterprises and the solutions, whether they are for profit or not for profit, to ask questions, to uncover models which, just with the developmental aid may or may not have become obvious. So I think this meeting of two separate ends of the spectrum, someone very nicely had called us like oil and water as the two sources of capital. But I think it forms that thin layer where oil and water can actually merge, and I don't know chemically what does that form, but I think there is that possibility. So there is that big benefit of blended finance, that the best of both are working towards achieving impact at scale with sustainability. The second one is an interesting one that you said about the role that philanthropic capital should play. And I agree with you in the sense that, just going on supporting a model which may never become sustainable in most situations may not be appropriate, right? And I say in most situations because there will be segments which possibly can only be served through grants, right? It can never become a self-sustainable model. And there will be some limited scenarios where that too is needed. If there is an income segment, there is a market segment where sustainable models cannot be built. But I think in most areas we can find a solution where the solutions can be made sustainable, either through government support, through market-based support, or other forms. So I think there are those scenarios where philanthropic role should be limited, and blended finance has that benefit that it pushes you to think about your limited role, your exit strategy, a term which is not very common in the philanthropic world. And blended finance could be that exit strategy, could be that sustainable strategy at scale. But the first one is, of course, the biggest benefit of blended finance, which is that it naturally draws in capital, larger pools of capital. It allows the participation of private pools of capital, of commercial pools of capital, of developmental aid, in a way that we can still achieve that common objective, that common impact goal that we are going after. And we've seen that happen in several of our instruments that we have participated at the Dell Foundation.
Excellent. I'm guessing a philanthropist is actually listening to this conversation. And one of the questions they're probably asking themselves is, hey, I get both of these. There is a problem that I'm looking to solve. There is a proposal in my hand. How do I take a call whether I should take a traditional philanthropy approach here or should I take a blended finance approach here? And then, Prachi, I want to just give a little bit more context. Because in the current conversations that Satwa is having in the ecosystem, especially with the domestic philanthropists, there is this genuine interest to say, hey, can I keep my dollar or my rupee and make it work much more? And so for them, the idea of blending, the idea of looking at it as a debt and so on versus a grant is a very real question. So there is a decision-making framework they often ask for, saying, okay, where do I apply what thinking? And as someone who's done this across the entire spectrum, how would you sort of approach that decision?
Well, that's the trickiest part of blended finance, whether the situation in which you are applying it is actually the right situation or not. And I hope that a lot of this will start becoming clearer over the years. But there's some pointers that I can share, largely coming from our experience at the Dell Foundation on situations where it lends itself very well. The number one thing which we look for when we are structuring something for blended finance is that there is a history of data available. There is a clarity on the matrix, on the measurement methodology of that metric, and there is some history of data available with organizations who could participate in that structure, right? So saying that in education, learning outcomes are the important metric, and there is general sort of agreement on that being the right metric. But there are a set of organizations which can actually go and measure it reliably through methods which have been proven in the past. And we know that there are a set of organizations which actually can show that in the past, on these metrics, they have shown an improvement at a certain cost. So that's I think, almost core. It has to exist before you walk down this path. The second thing which has to happen is that there has to be, at the end of the day, there has to be interest from both sides to participate, right? There has to be interest from commercial capital or from government to say that we want to participate in it in terms of either being the risk capital or being the outcome funder. But there also has to be philanthropy, which agrees that this outcome is important to us. So it's important for both sides to be present as for this common goal that we are looking to achieve, and that's again core to the structuring of some of these instruments. The third thing I would say is that it may not start always with a large set of service providers, which could actually deliver on that objective or goal. But there has to be, I would say, some starting point over there, but there has to be a path where existing solutions can come around this common definition of goal or the common definition of impact that we are talking about. And there are examples from the Skilling Impact Bond and others where I've seen that also happen, that there is a starting point, but there's a path to get to that point. It's not completely out there in terms of their own organizational journeys. I would also say, Ratish, where it is not usually the starting point for a blended finance discussion is when we're trying to do rapid innovation, right? When you're trying to test out new things, solve a new problem which has never been solved before, because there you want a very different kind of risk taking to happen. You want to do it fast. You want to do it without restrictions. You want to give more flexibility to your partner organizations to be able to try and fail, I would say, largely at several different things that they want to try. So we have not found it as a very good tool for innovation and early stage innovation, I would say. So I would say that there are scenarios where this makes sense, and the scenarios where it does not. It does have today in India a large cost in terms of the measurement cost and structuring cost. And there are solutions emerging like Satwa itself, who are trying to bring it down to make it, to make some of these structures more mainstream structures. So there are solutions like that emerging. But for a donor organization today, it is adding that overhead, both of structuring as well as ongoing measurement and management. Where again, we have to consider that, how much of our objective in doing this is short term and how much of it is medium term or long term impact of many more of these happening.
And as you're speaking, Prachi, I'm also realizing that there is a maturity curve even for a startup or an idea where, when you first come up with an idea, the only people who trust you are friends and family and saying, hey, that's the most risky capital you can get. And then you move to a seed round and then a Series A. By the time you're Series B, the numbers and the due diligence is up a different level. And then you go to the markets and it's entirely another level of, rigor, maturity that you need to have and predictability that you need to have to get there. And I heard this even when you spoke about MSDF's own journey as well, that ideas have to get to a certain level of maturity before they are ready for blending, because expectations, predictability, benchmarking because of past data, quality of providers all become a far more important than an early stage idea. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Absolutely, that's a very nice analogy that you put there. It is almost saying that, as but whether you are a Series B set of problems and solutions that are getting solved, because at that stage, when we look at the business models, we start looking more at the predictability. We start looking at the predictability in the business model, right? You put up a business plan out there, will you meet it or not? And that's what a Series B investor would be betting on. They're also seeing a source of capital which will come and give them the exit for a Series C, Series D, or whatever listing at the end of the day. So they are seeing that, okay, I am participating in an impact bond at this stage, but really this impact bond will become very successful when government starts deploying its funding in this fashion, right? So I think it's a very nice analogy to say that there is a maturity curve. And this type of funding almost comes in at a later stage maturity of the problem that we are trying to solve.
Just to make this tangible, from a MSDF's own experience, can you maybe take two examples? And if I could request you, one where it was unlocking public capital, where the government was putting in money and you sort of made that happen. And another where perhaps market capital or unlocking in some form happened. Maybe just gives us two very different flavors of what we're talking about.
Sure. Let me start with the Skilling Impact Bond because it has the participation of NSDC, the National Skills Development Corporation, in it. Defining a little bit of the structure of the Skilling Impact Bond. The Skilling Impact Bond, the objective is to improve the placements of youth in a certain salary level of jobs and ensuring that this placement has been good in the sense that they stay in these jobs over an extended period of time, which means that this is actually a career pathway for them. It also has the objective of doing this with gender parity. And so women participation in the bond is also a factor on which payments are made. So the objective is, placing retention as well as gender parity. The way it is structured is that there is a set of risk investors, NSDC and the Dell Foundation are risk investors, who are coming in and saying that if a certain set of service providers are able to achieve these outcomes that we have outlined, we are willing to put in the upfront capital in the form of grants which are being given to the skilling training providers. And if they achieve the impact, then there are outcome funders who will pay them back. So they will pay back the capital which was given upfront, but they will also give an interest on top of it for the risk that the risk investors are taken. And on the outcomes side, we have several Indian CSRs also participating. Again, it has a lot of other parameters in terms of how it has been structured, monitored, ongoing certification, verification of these outcomes. And the impact that it will have is not just that today NSDC is participating in it, but the impact that it can have is on the entire ecosystem of skilling schemes in India, right? Today, when we talk about skilling schemes in India, maybe 80% of the payment is made on just graduation of certification out of a skilling course, maybe 20% on placements, but we do not talk about retention. And here we are talking about all three because the last two are just as important. Whether you got a job and whether you stayed in that job really ensures that the skilling company has done its job. So as the skilling impact bond is progressing, it is getting the government money or the government participation in the form of NSDC's participation. But I think the bigger impact that it is creating, it is redefining how skilling schemes should be run in India or could be run in India. And that's the bigger ecosystem impact that it will have on that. So that's one where we've seen a huge impact of government participation in the scheme. On commercial participation, we've not completed this bond yet, but we have recently structured the lifted impact bond, which is on foundational literacy and numeracy. It has a similar structure to what I just described for the skilling impact bond, but the goal over there is to improve foundational literacy and numeracy levels of children in grades 1 to 3 as per the Nipun Bharat mission of India. Here on the risk investing side, we have the SDG Outcomes Fund, which is a Europe-based fund, and they are providing the commercial capital to take the risk on this initial set of fund companies which will be doing it in partnership with the government. It actually very beautifully blends both because we have SDG Outcomes Fund providing the risk capital and they have the ability to scale it up many-fold. We have the traditional CSR as well as foundations on the outcome side. We are one of the outcomes funder, but this whole bond is being run in government schools and it is an indirect intervention. So in a way, it is also demonstrating to the government that through these types of intervention models, which are largely just using your own workforce and your own teachers and trainers, this impact can be created over a period of time with this kind of a cost. Right. So it will achieve both. It will achieve the attraction of different pools of capital to make it happen, but it will also give to the government a ready-made model that they could scale on their own if they align the incentives in a certain way.
So that's a great example, Prachi, because I recognize that demonstrating that value for, like you said, the extensive capital that is getting spent on skilling gives them the belief that this is possible, but also the benchmark and the data and a set of providers who might actually make that happen. Is there an example you can take on the commercial capital side that might actually be relevant as well?
Sure, Rathish. I think a very good example on the commercial side is the guarantees that we are participating in. The way we have been participating in credit guarantees is that we provide a credit guarantee to an NBFC for a very specific purpose. So we could be providing it for saying that, today you are not reaching out to a certain type of small businesses or a certain income segment at all. And the reason why that NBFC may not be lending to that pool of customers is because the perceived risk of that income segment or that target segment is higher. And therefore, from their own risk returns profile, it may not be a risk that they're willing to take. So here, credit guarantees play a very strong role, where we come in and say that, okay, from a first loss guarantee perspective, we are ensuring a certain percentage of that portfolio, and then the NBFC has the ability to go and take that risk and actually start lending in that portfolio. And this, of course, because all the capital which is coming into this NBFC for on lending is commercial capital, we look upon our leverage as 2 to 20 times almost, because it is happening in a company which is already functioning, which is already present. They have the systems and processes, all of that. And once this model is proven, once they see the quality of this portfolio, the NBFC will naturally extend its market if it has a market to extend to.
Excellent. And Prachi, I'm glad you brought this example up, because one of my hypotheses is this is an understanding that public systems and private systems are designed for a certain level of risk and a certain level of specificity. When NBFCs lend, they have to measure risks, and for companies in general investing in something, they have to measure what is the level of risk I can take, but they also need a specificity on how do I understand the interest rate I can charge. Do you have some data? Similarly, my own experience now working with the government is procurement systems need a level of specificity, and they can't spend the money in figuring out that level of risk and specificity before. And what philanthropy does is to subsidize that risk in some form, which just gives them greater agency to operate, and investing in bringing that specificity that then allows them to engage in this market, because they have internal systems that have to measure some of these very, very specifically. For me, the example that you gave on the credit guarantee is a great example, because that's exactly the question on capital, which is, will I get this back? And if I don't know if I'll get this back, I will up the risk and interest rates, which make it unviable in the first place. Right? So, and I think there is a pattern there. I wanted to sort of segue to another question, which is from the other side, because we talked about somebody who was asking a question on, I have a problem to solve, what capital do I have to get? But I also recently see a lot of people who say, I want to do blended finance. Where do I put my money? And that is a function of this being sold on the efficiency, but not knowing where to spend it. And I do think, and I don't know if you will agree with me, there is a lack of imagination on how do I use this new instrument I have access to, which promises great value. And in some cases, just unlocking imagination, I feel, will just open this market up significantly. And so, one, wanted to get your thoughts on, is that true? And two is, build this further with you on how do we unlock that imagination in the first place.
Yeah, that's, I think, the most interesting part of blended finance, and the imagination on how can we solve the problems that we're looking to solve differently but efficiently. And I hope that the second is the more important phrase that stays with everyone, is that it's more efficiently versus this is a new cool thing to do, and therefore let me participate in blended finance. But yes, I think, this is where there is a lot of power in blended finance to be able to solve the problem and imagine solving that problem differently. I have several examples, and I'm thinking which one to go with first. But let me start with the example of a social success note that we participated in with two school financing companies. These are Vartana and India School Finance Company. These are companies which provide loans to affordable private schools, and then the school can actually use the loan for any purpose they want. Now, again, for the foundation, as we were witnessing, the change which is happening in the ecosystem is a lot of students coming from low-income families are today going to affordable private schools. They are not going to government schools in the same percentages that they were earlier. And therefore, it was just as important for us to improve the quality in affordable private schools. But at the same time, the private schools ecosystem does not have an SCRT like a government school. It does not have that benefit of aggregation that you have in government schools, the scale that you have in government schools, and so many other things, right? So this is where imagination kicks in. There we said that, okay, can we just do something very simple with players which already have a good installed base in terms of their client customers, 1,000+ schools that they're lending to. And the intervention has to be very simple because this does not have a natural sustainability lever built into it. So the social success note was designed as an interest subvention where we gave a credit line to these school financing companies, which they further on lent to the schools, but with the difference that the schools were given an option to participate in a quality improvement program. And if they improved the quality of learning outcomes in their schools, we would reduce the interest rate for the school financing company and they would pass on that financial incentive to the schools. So there was nothing being done in terms of new forms of teacher training or new edtech tools being given to them. It was a simple financial incentive alignment. And 75% of the schools actually achieved that target, thereby demonstrating that schools can actually improve learning outcomes. There is a very simple financial incentive that you could align for that purpose.
Yeah. And I want to abstract this a little bit, Prachi, because I think it'll be interesting. So the principle is if there's an existing financial transaction that is already happening, which is between two parties, which has a certain return, by integrating social capital into that transaction, we can get the receiving party to work on specific social outcomes in a way that delivers better value for the poor. Now, I can imagine the same thing happening, and again, let me know if I'm wrong, but I see the same thing happening in a clinic, in a hospital, in anyone, to say, hey, listen, I will give you a loan to make your clinic a better clinic, but if you can improve your patient treatment standards and patient satisfaction standards, if your process adherence around XYZ gets improved, I can shave this off. And it is the financial transaction continues to remain the same, but the quality improvement achieves greater benefits for the poor. Would that be a fair summary of how we can sort of translate this imagination across the board?
Yeah, it's a great summary, Rathish. And I would just add to it that one should also think about why already the market is not behaving like that. So yes, as social capital, I am coming and giving you that financial incentive to improve the learning outcomes. But why weren't these schools already doing that, right? And I think that is where the role of philanthropy and that limited role of philanthropy, like you were saying earlier, should kick in. So let me elaborate a little bit on that also, that why we did this structuring in this fashion is we said that today, even the information on learning outcomes is not available to parents, right? And parents are almost making their choices in a black hole to say that, okay, the school looks better. This is their grade 10 results maybe are better if they are available, but they really don't have that information available. Now, for a limited period, if I will change this financial incentive for the schools towards learning outcomes, the schools should ultimately see the benefit of getting more students or be able to increase their fees in those communities, because they will be able to pass on this information to the parents, maybe directly, or the parents will observe it indirectly that my child is now learning better. So the theory of change over there was not always to be the one subsidizing the interest rate or adding that financial interest, that financial incentive kind of always, but to play that catalytic role where eventually the transaction between the customer and the service provider, the parent and the school, will start moving towards a more efficient market where there is more information available and the customers are being able to make the selection towards a more superior product.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean completely. Is that somehow you need to find a way to shift the equilibrium. Because in the end, the transaction is still between the customer and the provider. I mean, we can't perpetually sort of change that. But if they can shift the equilibrium through a one-time incentive or incentive for a period of time to a new equilibrium, it's very hard for it to reverse back. It's not like I taught your kids very well earlier, now I'm not going to do it. And the parents are hopefully going to step back and say, but that's not okay. I will need that consistent quality. And as you said, maybe there is a financial premium to good quality as well that makes schools sustain some of that investments that they've been able to make this happen. Great. So this is a great example, Prachi. Is there another one? I'm being greedy now. I can keep asking you for more.
Let me give an example where I know you have played a very strong role. Satwa has played a very strong role, and you alluded to it when you're talking about government procurement and how it's not possible to change government procurement overnight. Um, India has one of the fastest growing edtech ecosystem in India. Yet, if you'll see the participation of edtech companies in government schools, we can count it on our fingertips where high quality solutions are being used. Again, the question is why is government not purchasing these products? And a very simple reason for that is that today nobody is putting that very simple rate card out there to say, if you pay me X rupees per child, I can give you Y improvement in learning outcomes. It's like a road getting constructed, right? I pay 50 rupees per kilometer, I get the road of a certain thickness and quality, which lasts you 5 years, right? And the government understands it, and it will outsource the construction of roads. No one is willing to do that for education. But we see a huge role for EdTech in our government schools in procurement of these products and services which are coming. So this required a two-step solution. The first was Bharat EdTech Initiative, where through Satwa's support, we got several rounds of emerging and established EdTech solutions to come and start proving or start demonstrating that through what usage model can what learning outcome be achieved. So all three were getting designed. What was the cost per child of that solution? How should the child use that solution? So should I be doing math on EdTech 30 minutes per week for 5 months? And if I do that, then how much will my learning outcomes improve? So we did that entire exercise over 2 or 3 cohorts of different types of EdTech solutions. And as a result, we had a very strong database of what it costs and what it gives as the outcomes. Now, on top of it, we were having parallel conversations with Niti Aayog on how outcome-linked financing or outcome-linked contracting should be mainstreamed in government schools. So we were able to design with them for the aspirational districts outcomes-linked edtech procurement models, which is again doing the same thing. They floated an RFP. They said that, okay, part of your payment is linked to actual achievement of outcomes. But it was a very realistic RFP because they actually knew that how much achievement is possible in a year, right? You're not asking for something unrealistic. And they knew that this is the range in which we should be paying for achievement of that outcomes. So this is, again, you have to reimagine the government procurement systems, but it requires some thinking, it requires some groundwork to be done. And it is not as if when we were doing Bharat EdTech Initiative, we said, okay, finally we want to do the Niti Aayog outcomes contracting design. The Bharat EdTech Initiative was done because kids were not in schools at the time of COVID, and that's the problem we were looking to solve. And just like in all the other examples I gave, a naturally superior solution and a larger ecosystem impact solution emerged out of the rigor of the base work that we did.
And I mean, here I can talk to you more as a partner in the journey, Prachi, because one, I remember the amount of effort we put in collecting good quality data. How many times are they logging in? How many times are they, what are they learning? How soon? How quickly? We did continuous evaluation. And as you rightly said, at that time, we didn't know where all of that data will come together on. But the principle of rigor and the principle of outcome and having a learning partner who's telling us whether there is actually improvement, etc., by significant investments. And I know countless discussions we've had to say, okay, where does this sort of land us to? Because both of us were clear that it's not a perpetual philanthropy play. I mean, that's not going to sustain itself given the scale of the problem. And again, I just want to sort of underline what you talked about procurement. Again, just given my experience now working with the government, great ideas are stuck in, I keep saying there's an hourglass figure. There's some very good ideas on the bottom, and then there's a very thin spindle out of which you have to move to the other side where you can achieve significant scale. And that spindle is governed by things like procurement and rate card and so on, where high quality data makes a big difference. And the unlock after that is significant because it's not like the government does not have the money. It's really the ability to sort of fix it into a system where it can actually happen. Great. Is there a third example, Prachi? Because then it'll be good to sort of bring this all together back.
Sure. I'll give a third one, which incidentally, Ratish, also emerged at the times of COVID. And, COVID was a huge, unexpected, unplanned for kind of calamity for all of us, right? The one which impacted the low income families the most. So, in a way, it actually pushed all types of capital, but particularly philanthropy, to be very efficient on the use of their dollars. There were so many people who were impacted by it. The level of the problems was so large, as well as the solutions were so unknown, and that you had to be one efficient, you had to be collaborative, and finally you had to demonstrate results, or you had to achieve results in a very short period of time. And I think those are some of the principles that we hold true for blended finance as well. The final example that I wanted to give was of Revive, which also emerged as a platform during COVID. And what Revive did was it was trying to solve for this immediate liquidity crunch which happened in the market in terms of debt or other forms of capital being available to really small businesses. So they went ahead and designed a returnable grant. Returnable grant is a very simple structure. It's actually a grant. It's not a loan, but it's given it's given like a loan. It's an interest-free loan to an individual. But at the end of the term, if the loan has served its purpose, just like you would have returned it to a bank, you will actually return it to the organization from which you got it. And Revive tested returnable grants, I think for the first time in India, with several not-for-profits which were providing loans, which were earlier providing just grants as startup grants to small entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs. But because they could no longer just deploy that kind of funding, they wanted to recycle the money. They actually deployed it in the form of returnable grants. And there was 90% return rate on the returnable grants. 90%, they've ran multiple cohorts now. 90% of the funding that they have deployed has actually come back, both during COVID, when there was such a big liquidity crunch on both sides, on the consumption side as well as on the availability side, as well as after. So again, a merging of different types of principles, which is there an efficiency on my dollar? Is there a new model getting tested? Can we now mainstream it? This is what Revive is now ready with, because they actually have pools of customers or pools of borrowers who are demonstrating very good repayment behavior. They were not even served by the traditional banks, or even the NBFCs were not serving these pools of borrowers, but they're demonstrating a credit behavior which makes them candidates for receiving just mainstream capital. And once this information is available more widely, a natural case for NBFCs to extend their products and services to them.
As you're speaking, Prachi, I'm just thinking of three different types of examples we've used so far. There's that type one, where it's pure philanthropic investment. Money is going as grant with no expectation from the funder to receive it back, which builds the body of evidence or the required data that can then influence market behavior or public system behavior. Like our Bharat Tech initiative is a great example of this. And some of what Revived it as well is just to show to people that, hey, this is possible, because the data is telling you that returns are 90%, which unlocks other forms of capital to come in. That's one. Where philanthropy is the playground where we are proving that this is actually working and bringing in data, evidence, and rigor. So this could be one part of the type of work we do. The second part of the type of work we do is where we look at an existing financial transaction, like the one with social success notes, and come in for a period of time to change the behavior or the equilibrium in the system as an interim catalytic capital that can then shift the system to more irreversible equilibrium, either in the government systems or not. But there it is not just that I'm proving it through data, but I'm also actually shifting behavior within an existing financial transaction. And the third is more an orchestrated system, like an impact bond, where I am bringing private capital, I'm bringing public capital, I'm demonstrating the evidence, I'm working with the government. It's a lot more heavy lifting to show where the solutions have to have a certain level of maturity. In Bharat Tech initiative, I would say the level of maturity was fairly low, so the philanthropy was taking higher risk. Here, the maturity of the system is much higher. Will this classification make sense? Because I'm as you're speaking, I'm saying even within blended finance, there are very different ways in which we're talking about how capital can be used, how philanthropy can see its role.
Yeah. The only addition I'll make, Rathish, is that the first one is actually not blended finance. The first one where we are doing a pure grant with no expectations is not really blended finance. It's much more second and third. But what you're bringing out very beautifully is that that role is not going away anywhere. Just because so many of these blended finance examples have emerged, are showing higher efficiency, higher leverage, higher impact. It's built on a base of work which will continue to be done in the wider ecosystem, right? So to make the point that yes, blended finance is here. Yes, there are many examples and many success stories, but it's built on top of a base where philanthropy should and will continue to play a role. So let's understand blended finance from that perspective also, in terms of where to apply it.
Clearly, there is a lot of value from blended finance. It has multiple ways in which it can add value. I also now wanted to talk about some of the challenges. And I wanted to talk about challenges broadly in two categories. One are more internal transactional challenges. And the second is more ecosystem level barriers. What might stop people from actually investing in this? And maybe if I could start with the internal one, it's a twofold question, Prachi. One is my own view, and this has been echoed in multiple conversations, is that the transaction costs of blended finance is still quite high. It is still expensive, and you touched upon this in the introductory remark as well, for funders to invest in blended finance today, and that is holding back, people from investing in it. And philanthropic capital is limited. How do you sort of, make it more efficient? This is one part of it. The second part, and I'll leave the two questions together, is that I know that blended finance is bringing people with different interests together to solve a common problem. And while there is alignment on the common agenda, there are also diverse interests and incentives for these stakeholders. Holding that tension is not always, I assume, going to be easy. And as you've seen multiple such examples, is that a challenge that is difficult to sort of execute, and because of which maybe we just take much longer time to land on some of these instruments as well? So both on the operating costs of some of these, and is there a way to reduce it? And two is, just given the diverse stakeholders and the diverse interests, does it just take more time for us to make this happen?
Yeah. Ratish, I'll go back to what I was laying out as the bedrock, or kind of like the pieces that you need to be in place for blended finance to happen. So what do you need in the first place? You need data, right? You need that track record, the metrics, you need the history. The second, you need a set of service providers as a starting point who can actually deliver on that. And then third, you need two forms of capital which are ready to participate in it. The biggest challenge that we have today is that of scarcity of data. We just do not have data available in a standard format. We do not have an ecosystem where ongoing measurements can be done in a cheap and efficient manner. We do not have an alignment also on these metrics in the ecosystem. So what you said about the cost being high, it is high because all of this is getting created sometimes for the first time for these instruments, right? So in the skilling impact bond, for example, this is the first time that we are actually doing verifications of whether or not those youth actually join the jobs. And if they join the jobs in 6 months, give us the letter from the employer that you're still there. These kinds of certifications are not getting collected today. So there is a big challenge which is happening today, which is leading to high costs, is that we just don't have the data. We don't have an ecosystem of data collection and all of that. Will that change? Yes. I mean, if I look at the way Parakh is evolving in India in education, the way we are talking about verifiable digital skills, or the way we are talking about so many ONDC and many of these systems which are emerging, a lot of these standard definitions will emerge, and we will very soon in India also have an ecosystem where this data is available more widely and more commonly. Yes, there is a challenge of the scarcity of data leading to high costs and operational challenges. But I'm also very positive on so many of these ecosystem shifts which are happening and development which is happening in India, which will solve for those problems in the short term only, I believe. So that's the number one challenge on cost. The other thing is actually a much harder mindset shift which needs to happen, which is the tension in bringing in these two types of capital together. Like the fundamental question, which is that what interest rate is a good rate, right? And, if I'm paying a risk investor as philanthropy, I'm actually giving a commercial benefit to a commercial investor. But the only reason the commercial investor came in is because there was that benefit to be received. And this mindset shift also has to be addressed through data. As donors, as philanthropy, as CSRs, we have to see how the efficiency on our deployed capital has gone up as a result of the structure, right?
Right.
If I was earlier deploying 100 rupees and achieving my outcomes just for 40 students, today, I might be deploying 110 rupees because I'm giving that X percentage interest also. But is my 110 rupees actually now serving that's 200 children instead of 40 children? Because really, those 60 children who did not improve in learning outcomes did not benefit from your investment, right? So it's a mindset shift which needs to happen. But I think again, this problem will only get addressed with this data getting put out there for the education of the larger ecosystem, that at the end of the day, you're not losing anything. You're really not giving that benefit in terms of interest rate to the risk investor, to the commercial capital. You're actually taking many X that benefit for the people that you're serving through your grants.
As you were talking, this struck me that the true promise of blended finance will be realized when some of these changes significantly unlock market capital or public capital in an irreversible way. And some of these are bets. We show the numbers, we are able to show this, so we assume it will stick. And we are also fairly nascent in the blended finance journey. I mean, I think this as a segment of work, I think it still hasn't seen 2, 3 full cycles of investments for us to know for sure. But do you believe that that irreversible change of the system, like the parents and children demanding quality from schools, for example, or governments able to use that rate card in an irreversible way, can actually be established, or is there a risk, or is there a learning on how to make that happen that is still open?
It can be done. It can be done, Ratish. It is already getting done in that small set of participants in blended finance. But if our institutions also gear up to absorb these innovations in terms of the way these instruments have been structured, I think we can also achieve a much larger impact. So let me just start with our own example, right? When we participated in the Quality Education Impact Bond, through our own partner organizations whom we had funded in the past, we're getting almost 2.5x outcomes than what our plain grant making had achieved in the past. Right now, we've tasted blood. We've seen, okay, this is actually possible. So we would push more and more in that direction, right? We would want higher and higher outcomes for our children. So similar. So that's the point on the participants, of course, get converted very quickly because it's a leveraged solution with higher impact. I think when this irreversible change or change at scale can happen when some of the institutional setups also start absorbing this financial innovation. And social stock exchange, I would say, is a great example, right? Stock exchange provides us the ability. In fact, it asks for all of this. It asks you for all of this background in terms of matrix in order for you to get registered. It is very simply asking for, okay, what's your cost and what's the impact that you deliver for that cost in order for someone to be able to subscribe to you as a unit. So social stock exchange, for example, will be a great way to institutionalize and scale it. CSR, the way it is participating today, it is not easy for CSR to participate in some of the blended finance structures as well. The two obvious challenges that they face is one, CSR money cannot be returned. So once you've given a grant, you cannot take that money back. So you can only participate on the outcome side of it. You cannot participate on the risk side of it. So the ability to recycle capital will be less. And also, what qualifies as the recipient of CSR is a tight definition today. Um, and these are simple changes which can be done, and I'm sure over a period of time they will come around, these small challenges also. But this is again an institutional shift, a thinking shift, which has to happen in the broader ecosystem for this step change to happen. So yes, the change can be irreversible in a small ecosystem for sure, and we are already seeing it. But for larger impact and mainstreaming, there will be some bigger ecosystem shifts which also need to happen.
One other question I had, Prachi, was around this idea. As we were talking today, there were so many ways in which blended finance can be used, and we talked about the imagination. One of the ideas I have is if there is a way to templatize some of these and say, hey, here are 10 ways of blended finance. Depending on your problem, are you trying to subsidize interest? Are you trying to do this? Which I think will also go a long way in just reducing transaction costs. As you said, data, provide a capacity, all of them are fundamental. But do you also believe that there is a possibility to templatize this so that just the intermediary cost on designing some of these become lesser?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you hope that that will happen in the system. So if there has been a structure which has actually delivered the results, and we do enough in terms of putting those results and those structures out there, I hope that the ecosystem goes ahead and replicates some of it. So that is what should be happening as the next wave of some of these structures emerge, is that we actually replicate at scale. One. The second thing is that we replicate with the right set of participants, paying for risk as well as for outcomes, right? So in the original structure, it might have been some form of philanthropy on both sides of it. But as these if they prove the impact, then yes, more government funding should start coming in and paying for it. Commercial capital in large volumes should start coming in. So this templatization, as you call, is definitely the next step. But what we've also seen is that templatization does not happen on its own. Us putting it as a public good, talking about it in conferences, making this information available, also, does not help achieve the scale that we all aspire to achieve. So therefore, there have to be intermediaries in the system, I would say almost the way investment banks function in our venture capital ecosystem, who are designed to increase the transaction volume, whose incentives are aligned to get many of these deals happen between the startups and the funding ecosystem. So I also hope that with this, some of the intermediaries will actually come out and start helping mainstreaming this. One, by replicating, but second, by also going out and doing the fundraising for them, because that's what will be needed to bring in all kinds of capital. New capital should always be one of the objectives in blended finance. We will need intermediaries for that.
Yeah, and I agree with you that a lot of this has to be demonstrated in practice and than just as a knowledge piece alone, because that does not have the required evidence base that it has to create is very, very important. Last question, Prachi, and I think this is to sort of round this up in the context of the current state of philanthropy in India, which I believe is critical. There is an expected unlock of significant domestic philanthropy that's going to come into this space, and in some ways, it's for me exciting because it's a new way of thinking. It offers us a new way of thinking about impact. Number one, it is rupee to rupee, and that has its own impact, which is 1 rupee is 1 rupee, and that's going to sort of change the way people look at it. A lot of them are people who have been industrialists who are now approaching with a certain mental model of how to create impact, etc. And if done right, Some of what we're talking about as blended finance can be the way they think about how impact can actually happen. But at the same time, a lot of this ecosystem is fairly nascent. As you also highlighted, some of the rules and norms and institutions don't exist yet. If you had a wish list of a few things that have to be done that you believe will help us unlock the potential of blended finance with domestic philanthropy, what would that wish list look like?
Number one, I would say, is more players trying to do this. That it's a very
Right.
small set of players who are actually trying to participate and innovate in the blended finance ecosystem. So more players, definitely some intermediaries need to come in for educating, but also enabling and empowering CSR and domestic philanthropy to participate in this area. So that is definitely top of my list. It's not really holding back the scale up today, but some of these simple changes in CSR norms in terms of who all can they fund and to qualify as CSR, how they fund, the periods over which this funding is deployed. These are very simple norms, but I would say that's the second thing which would hugely change the way blended finance is being used today. And the third thing I would say, Rathish, will be, emergence of more public sources of data, both in terms of what has been achieved, but just simple definitions. A lot of work that Niti Aayog does in that sense is very useful because they are taking that first step in defining what are the impact metrics, and different ministries are then incorporating it into their functioning, and I think just more of that happening. Not just in the private ecosystem, but actually broader, is very critical. So I hope that movement also continues.
Excellent. Prachi, thank you so much. This has been a super engaging conversation. And I think one of the things I really loved about our conversation today is just a lot of real life examples. So it's not like we are pontificating on something that does not exist, but are taking actual examples on how it can be done. Let me just do a roundup of what I took away from the conversation. And I'd love to have you add to that if I missed anything. Number one, like we started, the capital that we really need to solve the problems that we are solving for are significant. Number two, and this is something I picked up from our conversation, is that everybody wants to solve for problems at scale. And oftentimes, building the engine that allows for ideas to mature to a point where they can solve at scale is important. And at different stages, they need a different level of maturity and a different type of capital. Enter blended finance. It offers us an opportunity to attract more commercial and public capital that will serve the constraints and the incentives that those capital look for in supporting solutions. And two, it offers us a way to use philanthropy in its best way, which is as catalytic capital to solving that problem. We talked about this maturity curve where early stage ideas can get some seed money, which is largely philanthropy and high risk. But as soon as we are able to get to a stage where we are able to provide data of the effectiveness, demonstrate provider capacity to deliver at scale and at impact, and bring in a certain predictability to the ability to deliver impact, there are ways in which we can blend philanthropic capital with public and private capital to be able to create a much larger and greater impact with a significantly higher outcome focus, which then allows it to be absorbed by private and public capital going forward, where the role of philanthropy may actually come to an end. And as you said, gives everyone an exit strategy, which is not something we talk about often. We talked about various forms of how blended finance can work. We talked about how social success nodes take an existing financial transaction and catalyze a behavior to shift an equilibrium where greater quality focus and greater value for the poor can actually be achieved. We talked about impact bonds where we can orchestrate diverse stakeholders to come together to be able to work together with their interests coming in delivering value. And your skill impact bond example was a great one. And the credit guarantee work where we just reducing risk for capital to be able to do what it can already do because we allow them to take more risks. And all of these are great initial templates for us to think about where blended finance can play a role. We subsequently then spoke about what do we need to make this happen. at a much larger scale. And as you said, a very strong foundation of data is probably the starting point, because the cost of doing this today is higher because evidence is created for the first time, or there is greater uncertainty for us to even design some of these things. Having adequate players that have the capacity to be able to do this is important. But thirdly, and I think this is a topic we didn't address as much, so it is super interesting, is the role of institutions like social stock exchange. I think the value that they can provide in providing an institutional layer to be able to do this is going to be significant as well. I asked you whether this can be reversible, and as you said, in a very small ecosystem, it can be, but to make it a much larger conversation, we need to build ecosystem infrastructure. We need to build ecosystem infrastructure of data, of intermediaries that can actually help, and people are talking about this on an actual basis. We need to create that mindset shift by demonstrating more and more such solutions that hopefully can create templatization as well. And in the end, I think for me, what is exciting is this idea of building a value chain. And I think the point that you made, that even those that work on a pure philanthropy way of solving a problem can do it in a manner that builds evidence, builds data, that sets up those ideas for scale in a way that others are able to come and invest in it. And for a philanthropist to think like that, as building that foundation, I think is very, very important. I hope that's a fair summary of what we talked about.
It's very reassuring to hear a sharper articulation of what all I talked about. But thank you so much for that, Rathish.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you so much for your time, and it was a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was super fun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding Impact, a Sattva Knowledge Institute production. I am your host, Rathish Balakrishnan, the co-founder and managing partner of Sattva Consulting. If you liked this episode and the conversation we had, head out to our website, Sattva Knowledge Institute, to read more content on Capital for Impact. If you have missed any of our episodes from season 1 and 2, you can find them in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you actually listen to your podcasts. Do join us again in a fortnight for the next edition of Decoding Impact.